I'm Victoria, and to say my life took an unexpected turn recently would be the understatement of the century. Married for 8 years to Michael, a man who's as predictable as he is kind, I thought I knew everything about love and fidelity. But life has a way of challenging even the most steadfast bonds, and sometimes those challenges come in the most surprising forms. So, here's my story about how my husband almost caught me in a situation I can barely explain. Michael and I met back in college. He was the boy with the gentle smile, the one everyone assumed would settle down in a small town, marry his high school sweetheart, and live happily ever after. And that's pretty much how it went. We fell in love, got married, and adopted Max, a golden retriever who, in a way, became the first child we never had. Life with Michael and Max was simple, comfortable, and perhaps, in hindsight, a little too predictable. I suppose you could say I never looked outside our relationship for excitement, because I never felt the need. Michael was steady, reliable, and always knew what to do. But then came a twist that threw our whole world off course. About 6 months ago, I started working a new job at a small publishing firm in town, which is where I met him. Michael's complete opposite, a man named Adam. Now, let me be clear, nothing even remotely inappropriate happened between us. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something spark up when Adam walked into my office that first day. He was charming, spontaneous, and had this smile that seemed to promise all sorts of secrets. For a long time, I told myself that this feeling was innocent. I mean, isn't it natural to feel attracted to someone new, especially when you've been with the same person for years? But the more time we spent together at work, the harder it became to ignore. I found myself laughing a little too hard at his jokes, lingering a bit too long during our coffee breaks, and catching myself thinking about him on my drive home. One day, as I was leaving the office, Adam asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. It was innocent, right? Just coffee. And besides, I could already picture Michael at home, spending time with Max like he always did. So I went. And that's where the real trouble started. As we sat across from each other in that quiet little cafe, Adam started opening up about his life, his family, and his ambitions. I felt seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. With Michael, everything was so stable and safe, but Adam made me feel alive. The conversation stretched into hours, and before I knew it, the sky was dark. I remember glancing at my phone, seeing missed calls from Michael, and feeling a pang of guilt. But I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing more than a friendly connection with a coworker. When I finally got home, Michael didn't say much. Just his usual gentle smile and a question about my day. I gave a vague answer, told him I'd worked late, and went straight to bed, trying to push thoughts of Adam out of my mind. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The guilt crept in, mixing with an undeniable thrill that left me feeling both exhilarated and ashamed. Days passed, and I convinced myself that my feelings were harmless. But as time went on, things only intensified. Adam started texting me outside of work hours, sending me messages that were friendly, yet with a hint of something more. I kept telling myself it was just innocent fun. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong. Yet. Then came the night that changed everything. Michael was out with friends, so I had the house to myself. I had just put Max to bed when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Adam, asking if he could come over to drop off a book I'd lent him. I hesitated but convinced myself that this was just a friendly gesture. A quick visit, no harm done, right? He arrived shortly after, and we sat on the porch talking for what felt like hours. There was something about the way he looked at me that night. Something that made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I felt a magnetic pull, a temptation I'd never experienced before. But as much as I wanted to lean into that feeling, Max's barks brought me back to reality, reminding me of the life and the man waiting inside. Just then, headlights appeared in the driveway. It was Michael, back earlier than expected. In a panic, I scrambled to my feet, told Adam to leave through the back gate, and rushed inside, hoping Michael wouldn't notice the lingering presence of my unexpected guest. Michael walked in, raising an eyebrow at me. "Why are you so flustered?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. I laughed it off, saying I'd been cleaning and hadn't expected him home so soon. But even as I tried to brush it aside, I knew something had shifted. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before, a tension that I couldn't quite explain. That night, I lay in bed next to Michael, guilt gnawing at me. I hadn't done anything truly wrong, hadn't crossed any lines, but it felt like I was dancing dangerously close to the edge. The next morning, Michael seemed quieter than usual, like he could sense that something was off. And to make matters worse, Adam texted me again, asking if I wanted to meet him for coffee. This time I felt torn. I wanted to ignore him, to focus on repairing whatever was unraveling between Michael and me. But another part of me, a part I barely recognized, wanted to see him again. And so, against my better judgment, I went. As I drove to meet Adam, my mind was racing. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, but there was a thrill I couldn't ignore. I arrived at the cafe and he was already there, waiting with that same smile. He pulled out a chair for me and we started talking as usual. But this time, the energy was different. There was an intensity in his gaze, a closeness in our conversation that left me feeling completely captivated. Hours flew by, and when I glanced at the time, I realized I was late. Michael would be home any minute. In a panic, I mumbled a quick goodbye and dashed to my car. On the way home, I practiced excuses, telling myself I'd just say I'd stayed late at work. I took a deep breath as I pulled into our driveway, hoping to compose myself. But when I walked in, I was greeted by silence. Michael wasn't there, but Max was waiting, tail wagging. I bent down to pet him, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. Max was such a gentle, loyal dog. He'd always been a constant presence in our lives. The thought of betraying Michael's trust, even in this innocent way, felt wrong. I had to put an end to this. Whatever it was with Adam. The next morning, I decided to tell Adam that we couldn't continue seeing each other outside of work. I arrived at the office determined, rehearsing the words in my head. But before I could say anything, he surprised me with a simple, sincere apology. "I think we need to keep things professional," he said, almost reading my mind. "I didn't mean to complicate your life, Victoria. I respect you too much for that." A wave of relief washed over me, and I thanked him. We agreed to maintain our distance, focusing only on work. I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. With a sense of peace, I went home that evening, ready to devote myself fully to Michael again. I wanted to focus on the man who'd always been there for me, who'd never given me any reason to doubt his loyalty. But that peace didn't last long. One evening, a few weeks later, Michael called me into the living room with an unreadable expression on his face. I sat down across from him, sensing something was off. "Victoria," he began slowly, "we need to talk." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've noticed you've been distracted lately. It's like you're here, but not really with me." His words struck a chord. I could feel the tension rising, but I tried to stay calm. "What do you mean, Michael?" "I'm right here," I said, forcing a smile. He shook his head. "It's more than that, Vic. Max, even he seems to know something's different. He's been unusually clingy around you, and it's like he's sensing you're hiding something." I looked down, taken aback. Could Max have sensed my inner turmoil? He had been staying close to me lately, offering an unspoken comfort I hadn't fully acknowledged. Michael continued, his voice softer. "I don't know if I'm imagining things, but it feels like there's someone else." My heart dropped. There it was, out in the open. But I didn't want to lie, and yet the thought of admitting everything to Michael felt unbearable. I took a deep breath and decided to come clean, but only to a certain extent. "I won't lie, Michael. I have been feeling disconnected," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I met someone at work who I felt a connection with. But it wasn't what you think," I said quickly, seeing the hurt in his eyes. "We just talked. Nothing more." Michael listened, really listened, for what felt like the first time in years. He shared his own feelings, too. How he'd been afraid of losing me. How he realized he hadn't been as present as he should have been. It was a raw, difficult conversation, but by the end, something had shifted between us. We both knew we had a lot to work on, and that trust would take time to rebuild. But in that moment, with Max curled up between us, I felt hopeful. I had come so close to losing everything, but somehow we'd found a way to start over. In the end, I realized that what I'd been searching for wasn't excitement or novelty. It was connection. A connection I already had, right here at home. And as for Max, our ever-loyal companion, well, he got more treats than he could ever hope for that night. After all, he'd played the hero in our story, reminding us both of what truly mattered.